Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. Welcome to the Zero Waste Ambassadors Program. ZWAP is the sound of knocking out waste in Missoula. Today, we're going to learn about waste. More specifically, where things come from, how they move, and where they go throughout a system called the materials economy. We will talk about how we can work together to knock out waste. In other words, how to reduce the amount of stuff we throw away. Let's go. Home Resource is a building materials reuse center. So if you combine a hardware store and a thrift store, that's basically what Home Resource is. The same kinds of things you can find at a hardware store, you can find at Home Resource, but they were donated, like things at a thrift store. All of the stuff in our daily lives is made up of a variety of materials, but let's take a moment to talk about the most common ones. Plastic and rubber might be the first that come to mind. We have a lot of stuff made from plastic in our lives. Some things we might not even realize are actually plastic. Wood and metal are both pretty common too. If you look in your kitchen, you'll probably find some things made from glass or ceramic, like cups, coffee mugs, and other dishes. Finally, we have textiles. That includes clothes, shoes, and all materials similar to those. So these are the most common materials, but where do they come from? Plastic and rubber are made from oil. There are some natural sources we can use to make rubber, but plastic and rubber are almost always synthetic. Where does wood come from? Trees? That one was probably pretty easy. What about metal? Metal comes from a material called ore. You may have heard of iron ore before. Just like there are different types of wood made from different types of trees, there are different types of metal made from different types of ore. Glass is made from sand, superheated and formed into whatever shape it needs to be. If you've never watched a video of glass being made, I highly recommend it. It is a very cool process. Ceramics are made from clay and different types of minerals. And finally, textiles. Textiles come from 3 different sources usually, and those are plants, animals, and plastics. Plants include cotton and linen, animals for wool and leather, and plastic. Most athletic wear and a lot of t-shirts have recycled plastic in them. How cool is that? Where might we find some of those resources? Take a look. Everywhere. There are a variety of resources to be found pretty much everywhere on Earth. If you can name a place, we can probably name a resource that we can find there. This is where the system, the materials economy, begins. We pull things from the earth by mining, drilling, logging, and other methods. This step is known as extraction. In the next step, those materials are sent to factories to be made into different products like a hose nozzle, a rope, doorknob, and literally anything else you can think of. This step is production. After everything is made in a factory, it is then sent to warehouses and stores. We can get things in person or order them online in the step known as distribution. Once we buy things, they end up with us, usually at home or school, because this is the step where we spend most of our time. This step is called consumption. All 4 of those steps create a system that we know as the materials economy. We pull things from the earth, make items in a factory, send them to a store, and then we bring them home. The system was made by humans, but let's just back up for a second. What is a system? A system is a set of connected things, parts, and processes that form a complex whole. So simply put, a system is a bunch of things or parts that come together to make a bigger thing. Natural systems like water cycles, life cycles, and food chains or food webs have something in common. They're all cyclical, or like a circle. There's no beginning or end, which is really unlike our current human-made materials economy. The materials economy has a beginning and an end. It's just a straight line. We can't start on one step without going through the previous one. This isn't sustainable and is so different from the natural systems that support life on Earth. We use trucks, boats, planes, trains, cars, buses, and delivery trucks to transport things throughout the materials economy typically. although there are some other ways like walking or biking that are really good options when available. Each of these vehicles gets power from some kind of fuel, and when that fuel is burned, exhaust is released, putting different greenhouse gases like carbon dioxide or CO2 into the air. Each time something is extracted, produced, or transported, it puts more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And materials travel a long way from the extraction step until we use them in our homes and schools. 5,000 miles on average something travels before it actually reaches Missoula. To give you an idea of how big 5,000 miles is, you could travel from Missoula to Billings and back 7 times, or Missoula to Yellowstone and back almost 10 times. Let's talk about greenhouse gases for a moment. Have you ever gotten into a car in the summer and it's way hotter inside than it is outside? That's kind of how greenhouse gases in our atmosphere work. Sunlight reaches the earth, and some of that energy gets reflected back into space. Some of the energy is caught by greenhouse gases like CO2 and re-radiated as heat. The more greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, the more heat is being trapped, warming the earth. Now, some greenhouse gases, like CO2, are natural and essential for life on Earth. We breathe it out, trees breathe it in. We just have to be careful about not putting too much into the atmosphere. We used to think the atmosphere was a lot bigger, and we could create more greenhouse gases without any problems. We also used to think the oceans were infinite, and we could dump our trash there too, but now we know that isn't a solution. It just made a bigger problem. We're learning this about the atmosphere now. So we've learned about the first 4 steps in the materials economy, but we do have another one. What do we usually do with things when we're done with them? We throw them away, and then someone drives them to the landfill. These are the kinds of things that can end up in the landfill with our current system, the materials economy. This is a lot of stuff, and most of it still looks pretty good to me. Not only do perfectly good things get thrown away, but throwing all of this away can lead to different consequences. Here are just a few examples. The materials economy contributes to climate change. CO2 and other greenhouse gases are produced all throughout our materials economy, and every time we make new things, like plastic bottles, we create more. With more stuff, the chances of it becoming harmful and polluting our air and water is higher, and our landfills will just keep growing. When there's trash everywhere, animals can get hurt and sick because it gets into their habitats. And people who live near this waste, well, they can get sick too. Landfills weren't always around. They're actually kind of new as far as human history goes. When people first started living in cities, there was no system for trash management. They just dumped all of their trash and human waste, which is exactly what you think it is, out into the streets. Can you imagine what Missoula would look like if we still did that? Well, people started getting sick because they were living in the middle of a bunch of waste. So the idea of the landfill was born. People took their waste outside of the city to dump it, and people were healthier and the city looked better, so the landfills did what they were supposed to do. But while landfills have helped with human health, we do have a lot more problems today. We throw away a lot of stuff, and most of it shouldn't be thrown away in the first place. Out of all of these things, very little of it should end up in the landfill. We have options like reusing, repairing, recycling, and composting most things instead of throwing them away. We have a choice. We can make the choice to use options other than the landfill, and it happens where we spend most of our time. Right here at home and school. This is where we can make our choices because this is where we are and where the things we buy are. To remember how to make a difference, there is a simple equation. When we make the choice to take action, that's how we make a difference. That sounds super easy, right? Let's talk about some choices we can make and actions we can take. There are a lot of R words that help us with waste reduction. The first and most important R we can do is to reduce. It means to use less stuff. When we choose to reduce, there are 2 parts. We can refuse things and not use them in the first place, and we can reduce the amount of what we do need. We can stop the materials economy in its tracks when we reduce. And items like those plastic water bottles, well, they don't even need to be made in the first place. So now we know about how to reduce, but we have more R words to talk about. Using the next two R words, we can change the straight line materials economy into a system more like the ones in nature. We call this closing the loops. The second R is reuse. It means use it again. This is the second most important after reduce. We can reuse so many things, and we can even replace most single-use things with their reusable version. We already reuse so much stuff in our daily lives, including things we might not even think about. It's easy to reuse even more than what's listed here. Think about some other things you could reuse. This is our smallest loop, where we use the least amount of energy. Sometimes we use no energy at all here. The middle loop includes businesses that can help us with reuse. This includes thrift stores, businesses that specialize in reuse like Free Cycles and Home Resource, and libraries. And those are only a few examples of reuse businesses. This loop uses a little more energy than we're using at home because we might have to get things to fix it, or we have to drive to the store. The final R is recycle, and it means to make it again. Now, recycling is important, but if we reduce and reuse, then we might not have much left to recycle, and that's a really good thing. In Missoula, these are the things that we can recycle. This includes different types of metal, plastics number 1 and number 2, paper and cardboard if it isn't wet, dirty, or greasy from food, glass, and we can compost food. Some places can recycle milk cartons in plastic number 5, but Missoula isn't there yet, but I think we'll get there. Recycling uses more energy than reusing, but still way less than if we were to make something brand new. Now, we know about some bad things that can happen when we produce a lot of waste, but what good things can happen when we close the loops? We can slow down climate change. If we use less energy to extract, produce, and transport items, then we can reduce the amount of greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere. We can never get rid of climate change altogether, but we certainly can slow it down and make it more manageable. But we all have to work together to make that happen. With less trash, air and water are cleaner. Animals don't have garbage where they live, so they're healthier. Landfills don't need to be as big with less waste. And people, well, we'll be happier. Remember that equation? When we make the choice to put the 3 R's into action, that's where we can make the biggest difference. We can keep almost everything out of the landfill if we use our R words. Unfortunately, though, some things are designed for the dump. That means once we use it, unless we have a creative reuse for it, like arts and crafts, then we have to throw it away. The good news, though, is that it doesn't have to be that way. We have options. One of those options is to make a request. A request is an action we can take to try to persuade someone to change. Basically, we ask them. We can make a request to companies to change the way they make or package their products. We can also make requests to our local businesses and encourage them to make more environmentally friendly choices, such as adding a compost service if they have food products, getting rid of styrofoam cups and takeout containers, avoiding giving out plastic bags, and so much more. There really are a lot of options. Can you think of any more? With those options and all of our R words, including reduce, reuse, recycle, refuse, repair, request, and rot, which is just composting, we can turn the current materials economy into one that creates much less waste. That means instead of a materials economy, we would have a zero waste economy. If we all work together, we can create that zero waste economy. Did you know that Missoula has a zero waste goal and a plan to get there? We plan on being zero waste by 2050, so 30 years from now. Zero waste doesn't mean we have absolutely no waste, because that's not totally possible. Zero waste means it's a 90% reduction in what we send to the landfill. If every one of us takes an action or two and encourages others to do the same, we can get to zero waste for Missoula. Thanks for watching. Now let's get out there and knock out waste.